Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 376 with Carlos Tanner. My guest today is Carlos Tanner. He's the founder of the Ayahuasca Foundation. And this is a foundation which, of course, studies ayahuasca culturally in terms of scientific research as well, the history of plant medicine, not just entheogens, but all the native plant medicines. And they do a lot of training. They have taken over 700 people through their training programs, and many of those have gone on to do deeper work studying with the South American shamans to become curanderos and open their own ayahuasca healing retreat centers, including Michael and Jamie Thornhill, who've been previously a guest on this podcast. So because of Carlos' work, a whole ecosystem around ayahuasca and the study of plants and understanding plant consciousness and relationships, both scientifically and culturally with plants. So today you'll hear both Carlos' personal journey and also looking at plant medicines and the cultural traditions of the Amazon and learning about ayahuasca and entheogens. We're going to look at it from many different angles. So without further ado, here is Carlos Tanner. Hey friends, real quick, I want to give you a podcast recommendation. Since you're listening to my show, I thought you might like to listen to my good friend Ben Joseph Stewart's podcast. It's called the Ben Stewart Podcast. And Ben, he's been a guest on this show back in episode 352. In that episode, one of the things I learned was the importance of fascia as an information pathway in the body. Ben's a well-known documentary filmmaker, and we share a love of making superhuman abilities accessible to everyone. I was recently a guest on Ben's show, so if you wanted to check out his show, you could start with that episode. But he has a whole range of really interesting guests, from his artist series where he has musicians and animators to healing series where he talks about healing frequency music. He's had mythologists on, astrologists, people in the psychedelics space, people talking about traditional cultural wisdom, mycology, food forests, and lots of interesting stuff. And so I think it's a great complement to the guests and the topics that we cover here on the Derek Loudermilk Show. So you can head on over to benjosephstewart.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts and check out the Ben Stewart podcast. Carlos Tanner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Derek. It's great to be here.
I thought maybe we'd start with talking about any miracles that you would like to tell us about that you've seen over thousands of different participants in ayahuasca ceremonies. Are there any for you personally, or that you've seen other people that are just still kind of blow your mind?
Yeah, blow my mind, I guess, is a help to define miracles, because there's been a lot about the definition of that word, I guess, for me. One part says that the term lost its meaning when I saw that so much more is possible than I previously imagined. And then the other part is that so much more is a miracle, because I also recognize that there is an inexplicable phenomenon of mystery and magic that pervades all life as we know it. And so many of the things that I came to take for granted as something I thought I knew, now I recognize as a miracle. But then at the same time, I recognize the possibilities are endless. So my definition of miracles has been flipped on its head. Mind-blowing, though, I think might be an easier one for me to try to tackle, rather than say nothing and everything. So we had the first thing that comes to mind was a gentleman that we had come down to do a very short program. It was a really cool concept, I think. I'm tooting my own horn, obviously. It was called the Curandero seminar. and it was just a 1 week program, and you did 3 ceremonies, but each day was with a different type of curandero, like a curandero from a different tradition. And they led workshops on a particular aspect of the tradition. And then you got to drink ayahuasca with 3 of them and see the differences, like in how they ran ceremonies and what their icaros were like. So it was a cool concept, I thought.
Yeah.
And so it was 2008, I hope, and either that or 2009. Well, one of those. And Don Enrique Lopez was going to be participating as the final curandero. And the other 2 curanderos that were leading ceremonies were Doña Otilia and Don Luis Coquiton. And anyway, they were 3 different indigenous groups, 3 different indigenous traditions, but all super cool people. I considered all of them my teachers. And there was a gentleman from Iowa. He was a retired police officer. He was actually on disability because he'd been struck by lightning and it had collapsed his ear canal and he had gone deaf in one ear. And maybe for other jobs, that's okay. But apparently, like if you're a police officer, you can't be deaf in one ear. That's like, I don't know, a requirement.
Safety, yeah.
Yeah. And so he was on disability, meaning like he was just kind of paid to not work. And he wasn't there to be healed of that. It had happened years and years earlier. He was an American. He'd gone to all different audiologists, doctors. There was nothing that you could do. Your ear canal is collapsed. That's it. You can't do anything about it. And so he, wasn't considering that it could be healed. That's not why he was there. But when he started to hear the curanderos talk about this magical like power to heal, he decided to bring it up. So he brought it up to see, like, would it be possible? And thankfully Don Enrique Lopez was there, and I had never worked with him before. I had hung out with him and spoken with him and knew that he was very knowledgeable, but I'd never drank ayahuasca with him before. And when we asked him what he thought, he was just like, "Oh yeah, got it. Like I can fix it." And this man was skeptical, like highly skeptical, I would say, based on like how he had been asking questions and acting. Like he was kind of coming with someone that thought it would be a good idea and kind of brought him along, and so he Don Enrique said, "I can make a medicine that will heal that." And it was obvious that he was like, "Okay, well, I'll try it, but it wasn't like he was fully on board until he then attended the ceremony with Don Enrique that night. And that ceremony was just like blast off into outer space, profound. And that was my first ceremony with him, with Don Enrique. The next morning I had a long talk with him, and then together we formed the Ayahuasca Foundation the next year, as a result of that ceremony. But more importantly, he left at like 4 a.m. after this ceremony because it was the final night and the group would leave the next day, and he needed to make that medicine. So he left and went 2 hours to get these plants and then bring them back and make this medicine, which takes like 3 hours to make. Like he spent like 5 hours to make this medicine, so that guy could take it home with him. And that meant so much to me, like it's one thing to say, "Oh, I could make that medicine." And honestly, if he had said, "Well, we don't have that much time," like, that's pretty true. I wouldn't have put anything against him, but he was like, "I'll make sure that you get it before you leave." And he gave it to him. And then, I assume that where this story is going, but that guy contacted me to let me know that his ear canal had come back to its normal shape and that he had regained his hearing. And this was 33 years after being struck by lightning. So, it was like, I would call that mind blowing.
Yeah, wow. And this, the character of uh, Don Enrique, to commit to doing something like that and follow through, and um, that's actually quite rare among people in a lot of senses. So I already have a sort of a sense of what kind of person he might be, from that story as well. um, and so so this led to the creation of the Ayahuasca Foundation. Could you talk a little bit about what the Ayahuasca Foundation is?
Yeah, the Ayahuasca Foundation is a nonprofit located in Iquitos, Peru, near in the Amazon rainforest near Iquitos. And the core is really a vision that I share with Don Enrique to teach the indigenous tradition to Westerners, to essentially like return the knowledge and wisdom of our own ancestors that was lost and back into our cultures so that we can kind of get them back on track and bring back health to our communities, but really like to the earth itself. And we really do believe that it is a mission that we've been like gifted with the blessing to be a part of this recovery of the earth and the cells of the earth, which are the humans that have somehow misaligned for a purposeful intention, but are now called to return to alignment. And so, you know, the course is based on an educational. I'm sorry, the organization is based on an educational course. We call it the initiation course. And we're about to start our 49th course. That's why I'll be going back to Peru very soon. And then later this year, we'll have our milestone 50th course. So in the last 12 years, we've had over 700 students that have completed that course, and many of them have gone on to open their own centers and have their own practices. I believe that you actually spoke with Michael and Jamie from
Yes.
Casa Galactica. They got their training on that course, and now they like work in that capacity, just according to the vision, almost identically. There are communities all over the United States and all over Europe and in Asia and Australia and Africa, and it's an amazing thing. It's like planting seeds that grow into their own orchards. And so, yeah, we just continue to do that. In addition to that, though, we offer healing retreats that are shorter programs. So we have educational courses and healing retreats. And we have two separate centers, one that we call the school and one that we call the retreat center. And at the retreat center, the last 5 years, we've been hosting research. The original research was funded by the British Medical Research Council. So it was the first ever government funded ayahuasca research. Now we have private funding for the next 5 years, which is significantly larger. So we'll be able to amplify the research that we do. The original research was published last year in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry, which was really special. One, that it showed that there was long-lasting positive effect for treatment of depression and anxiety and childhood trauma, but also there was a complementary or secondary epigenetic study that actually showed there was a change in epigenetic expression with the sigmar-1 gene, which is associated with trauma. So essentially, if a person has experienced trauma, they will activate their sigmar-1 gene by removing the myelination sleeve, which then activates the gene, and the gene then has an impact on a person's well-being. And then by doing an ayahuasca retreat, it was deactivated by the remyelation of the gene, which essentially suggested that the trauma had been resolved.
Wow. Okay, this is exciting because I used to be a scientist. I'm still sort of a scientist, but
I'm not. I should quantify that. I don't do the research. I host the research. So I did organize and I did, do a lot of work to get the funding for it. And, I work in that manner, but I'm not a scientist or a doctor. The people that do the research are Icaro Science. The research team is what they call
yeah,
themselves. And they are all doctors.
amazing. Um, I guess so. What's exciting about that for me is there's a certain percentage of the people of which I cross section of the population of which I sort of used to be one who like data and facts and sort of uh, evidence in certain ways that they can point to, which almost acts as a permission slip to go and try something. Um, and so, well, it's nice that like you don't need it, right? You could just go and try it. Go try ayahuasca if you feel like you wanted to. But I feel like science almost it's great to know, okay, cool. An effect with the myelination, like there's an explanation, but an explanation is only good if your mind wants to chew on something like that. But I'm excited you're doing it because I feel like that'll be bringing accessibility to people who want to do it the buttoned up way versus the more adventurous explorer way. um, and it kind of sounded like from other interviews I've heard you on that you approached the beginning of your journey more like an adventurer, like you just set off into the jungle to try to find ayahuasca and do a ceremony. Is that kind of how it started?
Definitely. Without a doubt, I mean, I still think that I'm on an adventure, to be totally honest. But yeah, I had no plans to open a retreat center or do ayahuasca research or, develop educational courses when I started. My thought was, my first thought going down to Peru was I am super messed up and I might die soon if I don't do something drastic to save my life. So that was my number one reason to attend ayahuasca ceremonies back in May of 2003. When I was there, things changed very quickly. When I got to my third ceremony, which was, a week into the experience, it was clear that my healing was the secondary reason. And my healing was the necessary impulse that got me on the plane to go, but there was a deeper meaning that I wasn't able to gain access to, as if the universe needed to speak to me in the form of pain to get my attention to do something that it wanted me to do. That's really what it feels like, if that makes any sense. Like, mm-hmm. I needed to be a heroin addict and hit rock bottom in my life in order for me to find the path that I was destined to follow. And that's really what it felt like when I was down in Peru that first time in May of 2003, was that I had found exactly what I was born to do. And when the Curandero Don Juan, who I was drinking with, was leading those ceremonies, told me it was my destiny to be a healer and invited me to be his student, it was like, yep, that's why I came down.
Wow.
And so then things changed, but I still was now on a plan where I'm going to study and I'm going to become a shaman, and then I'll go home and I'll help all the people that are suffering from similar things that I was as a shaman. Mm-hmm. And that didn't play out the way that I thought, or maybe it did. I don't know, but I guess with words. But, I ended up staying and starting an organization there to teach people how to become shaman. And, we don't use the word shaman, but I'm just using it because it's easier for people to understand. The true word that we use is curandero, which means healer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that part changed. The tree that grew more branches than I thought were going to grow. And the research was another branch of that. And now we're looking to open a third center in Costa Rica. And that will be for another branch of the vision.
My wife was just in Costa Rica earlier this year, and it seems like a thriving plant medicine community there. So that makes sense. That's great.
Yeah, well, what we're gonna try to do in Costa Rica is kind of create our own thing. I was very hesitant to stray from the tradition. Actually, in the beginning, I was like, oh, figured out a better way to do it, like right off the bat. And I'm like, okay, hold up, you've been doing this for like 6 months and you figured out a better way to do it than the 1,000-year-old tradition. And I kind of told myself, maybe wait, enough time before you make any changes. And so the course that we've offered is very, very true to the Shipibo ancestral tradition to this day. That's what we teach. But now, almost 20 years in, I do have ideas that I have shared with our staff and the facilitators that have worked closely with our organization for the last 12 years. And we do have ideas that we think might be better for the modern world. And nothing against the Shipibo or the ancestral or indigenous traditions of the Amazon, but they were developed and exist in a paradigm that exists in that region for the people and culture of that region. And Westerners, people from modern culture in Europe and the States, we're not like that culture. We see the world differently. Like you mentioned, we have a very like data-oriented mindset. Science probably is more likely our reference point for truth than religion or spirituality for many of us. And so, making changes to a tradition that addresses that works within that paradigm, but still is based on the wisdom of the ancestral paradigm. That's really our goal, to do that. And so to do that, we felt it would be better to leave the Amazon region and do that in a place that fits between the two. So Costa Rica is pretty geographically located between the two paradigms. And it also, like, culturally has found a niche little spot there where it kind of combines those two as well.
Yeah. And what would be an example of how you would shift the tradition to, I don't know, fit better with the modern world?
Well, there are some really positive contributions that are modern that aren't necessarily from the ancestral traditions, although I guess everything has to be from the ancestral traditions, depending on how you look at it. But something like epigenetic reprogramming, Psych-K, NLP, these are therapy techniques that were developed in a Western paradigm, but they do like tap into a spiritual element. And holotropic breath work, which you could easily say is actually a ancestral tradition. And also some of them are ancestral, like combining yoga and meditation, massage therapies, sweat lodge, things like that. But really, like, having the freedom to do that outside of the confines of one particular tradition, which is how we've operated for since we started.
You've referenced the Shipibo tradition, but I believe in one of your other interviews you said there is 100 different tribes or more that have a ayahuasca tradition, and you also mentioned these three curanderos of different lineages. I was surprised that there was that many different tribes doing that. Why pick the Shipibo lineage, or why did it fall under that?
Right. I mean, the easiest one would just be that I resonate specifically with Don Enrique. Don Enrique and I, when the very first day we met, within an hour, we liked each other. We were going to be friends. And so I don't know if I was like, I want to work with a Shipibo. I don't know if I was like, I don't know, tribally thinking or whatever. I was really just thinking personally about this one person that I am interacting with and how I feel in that interaction and how much I resonate. And once I started talking about my ideas, because it was my idea to start the course. I had been a student for 4 years with my first teacher, Don Juan, and I had taken notes and I had shot video and I had made recordings and I had done all these things where I developed this collection of educational materials. And at one point it just made sense. Like, why shouldn't I like share this? Like, why don't I figure out a way that I can share all this material that I've learned over the last 4 years so that people can learn it faster? People can learn it without needing to spend as much time or make as many mistakes as I had. And so when I shared that concept or that idea with him, he was like, I love that idea. That's why I'm here. Like, that's why I'm in Iquitos and not in my community, because God told me to come here so that I can teach Westerners the Shipibo tradition. And I was like, no way, that's why you're here? Like, that's why I'm here. Like, so we just like really, really clicked. And whether he was Shipibo or Kokama or Mestizo or anything, that really wasn't that at the forefront of my decision-making process. It was really just about our personal click. And I think it's important to recognize that, like, there's like a giant healing tradition called Curanderismo in the Amazon rainforest. That covers plant medicine. That can be using San Pedro as a central core, or coca as a central core, or ayahuasca as a central core, but it's plant-based, mapacho or other trees, or anything. And then there's like these divisions in that, and you can divide it by plants as the central core of a particular tradition. You can divide it by indigenous groups, which is often done, but then it gets like even more specific. So even if you were to say Shipibo tradition, it's almost like saying Catholic. Like you can say Catholic, and yes, there is like a general concept of what people believe, but we all know you could meet a Catholic on one end of the spectrum and another Catholic on the other end of the spectrum. They're both Catholic, but the one on the far end might be more similar to a Jew than they are to that other Catholic, because people are people. And so that, I would say, also goes for any type of categorization within a healing tradition. I get so specific that I just say we teach the Mahua Lopez tradition. So it's Enrique Lopez and his wife, Doña Vilma Mahua. And those are two familial lineages within the Shipibo that came together in their marriage, and their knowledge was shared amongst them. And they developed essentially like a fusion tradition based on those two familial lineages. And that's the specific tradition that we teach on the course. Because even if you were to drink with Enrique's younger brother, Miguel, it's different, just like Miguel didn't marry Doña Vilma, and so he like went in a different direction. Even within just one family, you'll see differences. But if you were to go to a different Shipibo community, there would be differences. And yes, the language, of course, keeps things in a similar strain. Obviously, Shipibo curanderos all sing in Shipibo. So, if you listen to a Shipibo curandero, you'll say, well, that sounds like the other Shipibo curandero, because they're all speaking the exact same language. But even with melodies, I had the pleasure of like doing programs like I described, where I was working with different curanderos, and there were similarities in melodies that were cross tribes, so like,
cool.
They use the same melody but different words and different language, obviously.
Oh, interesting.
And that was like really fascinating to me. How did that happen? Of course, if you listen to what they say, well, the plants taught us that. So yeah, the plant, if plant's teaching you a melody, then they'll teach somebody else a melody. They don't care what tribe you are, but it's really interesting to see, because it starts to kind of confirm that, oh man, maybe what they're saying is actually how it happens. Instead of trying to think that we know better than them, we owe it to ourselves to listen to their ideas as well.
I'm rereading the Carlos Castaneda books right now, and there's when they're doing peyote ceremonies, they learn peyote songs from the plant, from peyote, and he said, I will know if you copy someone else's songs, because they lack this heart to them. It's in those books, it's saying every song is individualized for the person, and so when you're doing the ceremony, each person has their own songs that they have to sing. So that's it's interesting, like the transmission of the songs from the plants is perhaps extends beyond ayahuasca into other plant medicine traditions. But one thing that struck me just recently was that you are also named Carlos, and you also apprenticed under Don Juan, which is his apprentice. There's some striking parallels there. Have you considered that before?
Of course. I mean, I've had people say, "Is that the Don Juan?" Like, I'm not Carlos Castaneda, and no, that is not the Don Juan. But yeah, I mean, Juan is John, and my name's not Carlos, it's Charles. It's just that if you go to a foreign country and live there, eventually they just call you, what the Peruvian or the Spanish version or whatever language version of your name is. And they don't say Charles, they would say Charles. So, it was just easier to let them call me Carlos. So yeah, but I don't know. Is there a parallel? I'd love there to be. I'm a huge fan of Carlos Castaneda. I think he did wonderful things for humankind in his contributions, and I would love to be compared to him or have my name and his name put in the same sentence any day of the week.
Yeah, those are important books. Yeah, I'll probably reread them again and again just to keep getting new information from them.
If I can speak just for 1 second, because there is a little bit of a difference, and I noticed that there are people that probably because of the influence of those books, to be honest, transfer that understanding onto the indigenous tradition or really the Shipibo tradition, because I don't want to speak for all the indigenous traditions, because I don't know. But a Shipibo curandero named Guillermo Arevalo told me very early on that there were 4 ways to learn an Icaro. And then this was like confirmed by Don Enrique as well. And it's an important part of our course, to be honest, to teach Icaros. But that those 4 ways, because you mentioned like there was only 1 way. But in the way that I learned, there are 4 ways. 1 way is just the same way that anyone writes a song, that you like sit down and work out a melody and work out some lyrics and you write a song. And the second way is that you learn from your teacher. So they teach you a song that they know, and then you learn that song from them. And the third way is that you learn from the plants. So usually in a dieta or in ceremony, the melody and the words come to you, and you learn them from listening to the plants sing them to you, which could happen in a dream also. And then the fourth way is that you don't actually learn it, but it appears in your consciousness. So you divine it. So like in a ceremony, you open your mouth to sing, and the song that you've never learned before comes out. And so I put those in the order of what could be called like the most, from least to most profound, receiving method. But the key to me was that it doesn't really make a difference. It's not like if you divine a song that song will heal your patient better than the song that you wrote. What does determine that is the connection that it has with your heart. And that to me is like what he was really saying in that book, was that you can't sing someone else's Icaro because it will be someone else's unless your heart is connected to it. Mm-hmm. But once your heart becomes connected to it, then even a Beatles song becomes your Icaro. And actually we recognize that, speaking of the Beatles or a band, like the Grateful Dead was a cover band. They played all like everybody's music, but so many people never knew that they were playing someone else's song because they had connected to it to such a degree that it was forever a Grateful Dead song. And then you'd be like, no, that's a Bob Dylan song. You're like, it is, because of that. You can take an Icaro and make it yours, even if you got it from someone else or somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate that. What is the purpose of the Ikaro in ceremony?
The Ikaro, that's a great question. To me, the Ikaros are multifaceted, and they often have a specific purpose, but to that Ikaro or to that moment of using it. But ultimately, the Ikaros are a communication in the Shipibo style. I will say that I had the benefit of studying with a couple other traditions, and they are different. So I'll speak to the Shipibo, and then maybe I'll comment a little on the other ones. The Shipibo style is a communication. One, it's a communication with the patient, but two, it's really a communication with your dietas or with the spirits of the plants that you know. And so a curandero is a curandero because they have built relationships with the spirits of plants. And an easy example of how an Icaro might work is that an opening Icaro would be to call to the spirits of the plants that you know and invite them to come and join you in the ceremony. And so the lyrics, if you were to break them down, would be to, I am calling to these plants and I'm calling to my ancestors, the spirits. It doesn't have to be just the spirits of plants. It could be the spirits of my ancestors to come with me, to be with me, to sing with me, to be present in this ceremony, to guide me and to help to heal the patients in this ceremony. A more specific one might be to ask in the lyrics of the song to help diagnose what is the true cause of a person's affliction. And then the lyrics might say something like, and now I will name your illness. And that's like a lyric, but that lyric is essentially opening a channel, by saying that. And when you're connected to the spirits that you're communicating to, you're kind of like saying, and here I go, gonna tell you, here's what I've got to say. You don't know, but by setting it up, then it does like come out. So in a way, it's like an intentional mechanism for channeling. And so
Cool.
also sometimes the plant spirits are the ones that are singing, and you're the vessel. You're the the microphone for that song to be audible. um, and then sometimes you're singing to the patient, so you're like telling the patient what you're doing or what you're seeing. So you're saying like the spirits are all around you now, the spirits are removing the negative energy from you, the spirits are pulling darkness from your heart, the spirits are penetrating into your mind. And like you're doing that. And when it's in Shipibo and someone doesn't speak Shipibo, they don't necessarily know that. But that's where it gets really fascinating to me, because there is this transferable faith, this transferable impact in the real world from the spiritual world. And that to me is like a way to understand what a curandero does, because a curandero has a knowledge, has a truth of that infinite possibility that we talked about at the beginning of our talk with the miracles. They know that not only can you be healed, the patient, but that you will be healed. And the patient doesn't know that, but the curandero does. And through the Icaro and through the effects of the ceremony, they transfer that faith to the patient so that the patient comes to know that they will be healed, or even that they are healed. And that is a really magical process of what I see happening in the healing process between a curandero and their patient. You know what I'm saying, right?
Wow. Um, yeah, I'm glad you spoke to the language thing, because if you didn't know Shipibo and he said, and here's your diagnosis, and you didn't even know that he was telling you, um, and yet you're healed anyway, or it begins the path of healing anyway. um, Yeah, that's I've only done one ayahuasca ceremony, three set of three, in that very thing you said of there's darkness in your heart and the spirits are pulling it out. That's exactly what happened to me. And I was like the last one still in the circle. Everyone else is like already gone to sleep, and I was having a really hard time. And the shaman had already gone to sleep and came back and did more singing to me and just like sucked all the darkness out. And here I am doing a podcast.
Nice.
Yeah, because it's I was the first time I did it, I was surprised that there was so much singing. It was constant. I believe our Curandero was trained in the Shipibo tradition as well. Maybe even through your, I can't even remember her name at this point, but yeah, maybe even through your training center. This was back in 2016.
Very possible. I mean, if you do remember their name, although you might want to tell me in private.
um, you said something that I want to come back to about the misaligned. Humanity is misaligned, but there's a purpose behind it, which I thought was very interesting. And it's I think people look at society and they see that it's gone off the rails, and they might not necessarily know how or why or whatever. And that's kind of layer one. But what you're saying, I think, is that that's all part of a bigger trajectory that perhaps you've comprehended in some way. Could you speak to that?
Totally. Thanks for bringing that up, because I do think that it's a really helpful perspective that I learned from my experiences and also within the tradition themselves. My whole story really started from me being a heroin addict and one night being so drunk and high that I blacked out behind the wheel of my car and I drove off into a river and I nearly died. I woke up, thankfully, as my car was sinking underwater because water was pouring in onto my lap. That was enough to wake me up. And thankfully, my window was down and I was able to jump out the window and swim to the shore. And I made like a declaration that night right there, staring at my car, like, I have to change. I've got to do something, and not just like some little thing. I've got to do something big. And then a week later, my friend was in Iquitos, Peru, which I had no idea she was going to do. She was traveling from Japan back to the US. She just decided to go to Peru on the way and just decided to go to the Amazon and just happened to meet these two guys that knew a shaman named Don Juan. And she thought of me and decided to write to me. She had no idea. We hadn't been in touch in months. So I get a random email from someone I haven't heard in months who's in the Amazon rainforest, who says she's going to drink ayahuasca with a shaman named Don Juan, and thought maybe I want to do it. Now I was like, there's no way that this is a coincidence. I literally like told the universe, that I'm going to do something to save my life. And then a week later, I get an email like this. So it was a sign. It was a very important omen for me. And when I got on the plane, I knew that I would be healed. I knew that my life was about to be transformed. I didn't really know how. And I was still small-minded, thinking I was be healed of my addiction. I didn't even come to terms with the fact that there was something way deeper that needed the healing, that the addiction was just the expression of it. And the point I'm trying to get to is that I needed to hit rock bottom in order to find my destiny, to find my path, to level up, to move to another phase, a higher state of being. And I think that's a common theme. People, it takes hitting a level of sickness, it takes a level of imbalance to then rise to a level that wouldn't have been conceived if it weren't for the trouble, if it weren't for the challenge. And I just kind of feel like that is what happens. Evolutionarily, it just makes no sense to me that anything would evolve if everything was okay. You were like, everything's pretty good, but fuck it, let's just evolve. It just doesn't make sense. What makes sense to me is things are not good. Things are so bad that we might not survive. Fuck, I need wings. That makes sense to me. And that makes sense why evolutionary leaps occur, that it's not some gradual process. There is a serious threat to survival that forces evolution to take place. And that to me is like part of the plan, I guess. At least that's one way of looking at it. But I will stand by my feeling that evolution is prompted by crisis. And if there were no crisis, there would be no evolution. And so if the human race is to evolve, or a species as Homo sapiens is to evolve, then it will take a crisis to motivate that evolution. Now, that's not so much answering the entirety of the question, though, because that's still locked in on humankind. I was saying something about the earth. And so first, I have tremendous faith in the earth. I think of the earth as a singular being, an organism that we're all part of, the same way that you have trillions of cells in your body that all are doing their own thing, but collectively come together to be you. And I do too. The earth is made of much more than trillions. I don't know what that number is, but it's a lot of individuals that all come together to be the earth. And there is a singular consciousness. And then, of course, the earth is then just one tiny piece of a much larger organism, and blah, 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 all the way to God. And I have a lot of faith in the wisdom of the earth. And I think it's naive for any human to think that we have anything close to an understanding as accurate as the earth as to what's going on with the earth. The same way that I would probably not think that my eyelash could tell me what's going on in my life. I'd be like, dude, you're just an eyelash, man, and I'm not going to try to take any guesses with any seriousness about what's going on with the earth. But I am going to be creative in my faith of her wisdom. And the way that I get creative is that I'm fascinated. In fact, I was just, when I picked up my daughter from school, she was collecting the oak seeds that are helicopters. They form helicopters. And ayahuasca does the same thing. Ayahuasca produces these really beautiful, delicate flowers, and afterward they produce a seed pod that looks just like oak, in that it has that helicopter wing. So they produce aeronautical vehicles to transport their seeds to other lands, to other places. And that's just part of the magic of nature, right? Like dandelions make these parachutes, and everything's got this crazy reproductive system that is so incredibly magical and fascinating and miraculous. But what does the reproductive system of the earth look like? What aeronautical creature or aeronautical technology does she employ to send her seed to another place? Does that look more like a spaceship? Does that, require humans the same way that a female mother needs certain hormones to be produced in order to create a baby? When a mother is pregnant, all of these hormones are produced that aren't normally there, and some of them that are there increase in population significantly. There's this population explosion of these foreign weird things that aren't normally there that are required in order to make this baby a reality, so that that can be done. And is the human race like the birth hormones of the earth, and so that we can create the aeronautic vehicle that transports the seed of life to another land. I don't know, but I like the idea. It makes me feel like much more excited about what the fuck we're doing. But but I guess regardless of the creativity or the accuracy of my idea, I still reside in the faith that the earth knows what she's doing. And so even if I don't have the best answer for everyone, I will always hold true to that faith, because I do recognize the earth as to be that living being with that consciousness and that wisdom that far exceeds my own.
That's it's such an expansive idea and fun. It's fun to think about analogizing a planet's reproductive is like we might be part of their reproductive system, and like culture or society might be some aspect of their broader consciousness. Wow, yeah. I know that so much learning and personal evolution and cultural evolution happens through pain and solving problems, and rising from the rock bottom moments. I guess I always am wishing for just as much growth through ecstatic moments, and like this a path to just as much evolution and problem solving, but without all the hard stuff. But through a different, just like the same amount of novelty, but joyful novelty in a way. Have you seen that through your work?
It's hard to deny that. So I like that you brought that up, because it resonates well with me. I would say that the shamanic traditions are just that, like they are a conscious attempt to use the most positive essence of novelty to boost our evolution. So I love that you brought that up, because it's clear that that's a part of it. I've definitely experienced that myself. So I would say that I was able to level up, to, I don't want to say evolve, but like to advance in my personal awareness as a result of hitting rock bottom, having that crisis. But I have also advanced significantly as a result of the ecstatic states and the like magic that I have experienced as a result of studying ayahuasca traditions. So both, for sure.
Yeah.
I guess in the same way that you might say, like, I managed to make incredibly profound changes to my life as a result of the crises I have experienced and gone through, as well as I have made profound improvements in my life as a result of the love that I've been blessed to experience in my personal relationships. And now I have a daughter, and, to suggest that I'm not like improving my well-being and my understanding of the world through her or as a result of her would be, ridiculous. She's my greatest teacher by far.
The same. My daughter's 3. How old is yours?
7.
7. Wonderful. When people come down to take your programs, are most of them looking for healing? Are most of them in a rock bottom type of situation, or could you just describe like who generally is coming?
Yeah, well, again, there's 2 programs. So the ones that are coming to do the educational courses aren't looking for healing so much as they're looking to study, that they typically have gone through a profound healing already in their lives, and now feel they want to give back, they want to share, they want to be able to help others to achieve what they were able to achieve. So that's, a separate program and a separate location, a separate group of people that we attract from that. But the people that come to do the healing programs, rock bottom is not a black and white phrase. There's no blood test for it. But so I would say that everyone is in need of healing, pretty much across the board. We don't really get too many people that don't recognize some level of healing that they're in need of, but it's a pretty big spectrum. But I would say that if you could imagine the spectrum to be on a 0 to 100, where 0 was rock bottom and 100 was completely content, they would be in the lower half of that, like almost all of them.
And part of the reason I ask is I see everybody, how to say it, when I look around and I see a lot of people need healing, need help, depression, anxiety, just struggling all around my city. I live in St. Louis. Just a half a mile away is like just a lot of people, there's whole neighborhoods full of people that as you walk through the neighborhood, you feel pain. I feel that. And it seems like such a big task. And so you've trained, I think you said 700 people you've done. You're going to be celebrating 50 of these, and yet there's billions of people to heal. There's like, it's a big task, right? And we can't, if we heal ourselves and become healers and then pass it on, but sometimes it seems like a drop in the bucket. Where do you see your work and plant medicine fitting in with like healing everybody? Is that
well, thank you for just putting that pressure on me. I'll do my best. No, I do feel like Enrique and I, as I mentioned, we both felt like we're a part of this mission, working in service of the earth. And, we're not the only ones. I do feel like there's a greater and greater potential for connecting. And that is significantly increasing, like in leaps and bounds. The fact that we're like experiencing what could be called the psychedelic renaissance right now, where the destigmatization of psychedelic experiences is happening like very quickly. That to me is like a really big hope for the future, where people can take substances that help to reduce their sensory gating, essentially allowing them to expand their awareness. And as soon as they expand their awareness, then anything can happen. And again, like the way I described the work that I see a curandero doing, where it's this faith transfer. So, a curandero can have 20 people in a ceremony, and that one person's faith can be transferred into 20 people's faith. And by faith, I mean that knowing that things can be resolved, that things can be worked out, that things can be better. And that to me can happen on an incredibly large scale, like a Christ consciousness type of scale, like where you have just one person and they're able to transfer their faith to millions of people. I don't want to like try to get into Christ or anything, but the concept, I think it's safe to say that people like Buddha or Jesus, they impacted a lot of people, just one person, and hopefully for positive ends. So I do feel like we're at the beginning of something that we can't actually imagine using like our limited understanding of how it works, or how consciousness works. I think that we're kind of still like in this archaic idea that like the brain just generates thoughts, but we're like also at the cusp of leaving that behind, and so could it be as simple as like a consciousness waves over us and then everyone thinks differently? Probably. I think that we get caught up thinking that there are forces against us that are trying to, keep our consciousness locked down or in a certain way or thinking a certain way. And I guess for me, I think that substances like psychedelics and the traditions that have mastered that art of consciousness enhancement through the use of those substances hold a really important key to making a major paradigm shift. I think that the singular shift of interconnectivity, like if we can return to that ancestral perspective where we recognize ourselves to be a part of the earth, that we recognize ourselves to be interconnected with all living beings, and that consciousness flows through us all, that one concept, although obviously deep, would transform our lives so much. So much of the afflictions that we have, to me, could be reduced down to this idea that we're alone. That we think that we're just alone on this planet, that we happen to be walking around on the same rock together, but that I'm just me and I'm just on my own. And we look at that, we try to project that, the survival of the fittest and everything is in competition. And we like hold on to these ideas as if they're the truth. But if we were to replace them with ideas of interconnectivity, that everything is part of a singular organism, then I don't think we would feel alone. We would recognize that we are all in this together. And the idea of competition would take on a bizarre meaning where we would imagine, does my heart compete with my liver? Do my lungs compete with each other? Like, that's such a bizarre concept that if we were to recognize ourselves to be the heart and lungs and liver of the earth, then would naturally like transform our behavior and the way that we perceived ourselves and each other.
Yeah. It's again, it's such a big concept to I feel like for myself and perhaps for the listener, sitting with all the things that you're saying, just to let them sink in slowly, will be in order. And I'm reminded of a couple interviews that I've done. One with Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon, who's describing how the brain is a reducing valve, a filter for consciousness, so that we can perceive through our senses. And sort of there's this huge ocean of consciousness, and our brain helps us make it discrete and sort of manageable in a way that we can have these, experiences of being in a body and touching things and whatnot. And it sounded like what you were saying with ayahuasca is that it, I can't remember the phrasing you used, but it opened the gates.
Reduced sensory gating, yeah.
Reduced sensory gating, so that there's so much more information in consciousness that's available, and that we're just opening the valve of perception a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that there's in these cycles of sort of universal, let's call them galactic, our solar system oscillates on this above and below the galactic plane sort of every 64 million years. And it's associated with these rapid leaps in evolution according to the fossil record. So you'll see species go from single-celled to multi-celled, or from aquatic to land, or bodies to go from very small to complex, like mice to elephant or something like that. And there seems to be some high energy field that our solar system is passing through right now, which perhaps is sort of bathing the whole planet and the whole solar system in a evolutionary pressure of elevating consciousness sort of all at once, which in some ways I see as like that's going to save us, which is like, we just can't help it but to evolve. But there's clearly like so many big things at play that I appreciate your, just faith in the sort of larger mechanisms of the whole universe in a way.
Well, I mean, it's a self-preserving motivation, like I would much rather just release that to a being of far wiser than me than sit in the anxiety of trying to worry about the future. But at the same time, I do feel that way. I mean, it does make sense to me. It makes the most sense to me. There's I have a very rudimentary understanding of it. I'm sure that someone, maybe your listeners, know better, but within the Mayan calendar, it seems that there's like a I don't know what the word is, if it is galactic year, where it takes this long for the solar
the precession
system
of the equinoxes.
the solar system to go around the center of the galaxy, and takes 26,000 years. But there's like a peak distance where once you get past that distance, then you start heading back towards getting closer and closer to that central sun. And that central sun's energy is like tremendous in its power. And so as you get closer and closer, a similar like effect where you start to get like shining light of a new energy that also like transforms. And so that 2012 like prophecy was really just the measurement of when we would turn the corner and now like start this long orbital path back towards getting closer and closer to that central sun. But both of these are very theoretical, but I like the optimism in them, that we, are suggesting that there is so much, well, one, recognizing that there's so much that we have no idea. Like there are forces on the planet and forces on the solar system and forces on the galaxy that we're like, just hinting at. We have just as good of an idea as like an episode of Star Trek to try to figure that out. And I guess that's also what lends itself for me to have that faith. Of course, my faith is based on a lot of experiences that I've had, where I feel like I have been in the presence of, witnessed, or even, combined, like melted into that consciousness, which would be like some of my most profound experiences. If you want to talk miracles, like my experience where I like had that epiphany of omnipotent omniscience, in a ceremony where I was no longer anything and everything, and I knew everything, and there was no time, and there was no up or down or left or right or back or forward or past or present or future. And I don't know, is that a miracle, or is that exactly what's happening all the time?
Yeah. You mentioned about the little helicopters. Would it be possible, my question is around sustainability. Would it be possible to bring ayahuasca vines and their adjunct plants to other forests and grow them sustainably, or are they sort of niched into the Amazon, and we just have to take what we can harvest from the Amazon? Could you talk a little about the ecology of the actual plants themselves?
Well, I'm pretty sure that there are ayahuasca vines being grown pretty much anywhere that they can be grown. They do require a tropical environment, but even then, I could easily see that ayahuasca vines could be kind of taught to adapt to environments that aren't precisely the same as they would be in the Amazon. There's some really like bizarre kind of facts about ayahuasca vines, but in Hawaii, there's a large forest of ayahuasca vines. Like decades old ayahuasca vines have been growing in Hawaii, really thanks to Terence McKenna. But also in any tropical region, there are ayahuasca vines. There's a lot of ayahuasca vines growing in Australia now also. So yes, you could definitely, and they should be. There's also like ayahuasca farms now. So the value of ayahuasca is it's one of the most valuable crops you could ever grow. the market value of a sack of ayahuasca is like insane compared to a sack of anything else you could grow. So just like economically, it makes a lot of sense for anyone that has land that could grow ayahuasca to grow ayahuasca, especially because as long as you have a tree, you're probably not going to do much with that tree. You could just grow an ayahuasca vine up that tree, and eventually you could harvest it, and you could sustainably harvest it and continuously produce sacks from one single vine. My first teacher had 3 vines in our backyard, but we would sustainably harvest them. So we would climb up the tree and cut the vines at the very top. And they were small vines in size, but they were, if you have a 40-year-old ayahuasca vine and you climb up and cut the top parts, the newest growth, you still have 40-year-old ayahuasca vine in terms of the maturity of its energy. Which may be like a challenging concept, but not in the indigenous tradition. So you do need a mature vine, but you don't need the base of that vine. That's the oldest part of the vine isn't necessary. Just like my hair isn't 48 years old, but I'm 48 years old, so like everything I've got, in fact, all of my cells of whatever, they're at max, 7 years old or something. But I'm 48 years old. I don't know if that's a good example, but yes, this is sustainable harvest, sustainable farming, all of it is happening and it is possible. A friend of mine named Chris Killam did probably the only sustainability study on ayahuasca, which was pretty extensive. And thankfully he found that there was not any like risk of losing it, or that we were like in a sustainable place right now.
Okay, great. Yeah. Some of the slower growing, maybe the cactus-based ones are more precarious just because they're, such a finely balanced desert ecosystem. You reminded me, we were in Slovenia and we had wine from 400-year-old grapevines, and it was like made by monks who chanted to it, and it was an experience. But there's like something to having really old plants.
Definitely.
Okay, so ayahuasca, growing, sustainable, it's a cash crop, amazing, and then there's all these tribes and traditions, and then you've trained all these people, and there's hundreds of retreat centers now.
Not from me. There are hundreds of retreat centers.
But like in Iquitos, right?
Yeah.
I think you said there's like a couple hundred.
Definitely.
Perhaps, and we talked about Costa Rica, and it's rapidly expanding. Could you just talk a little bit about the trajectory of where you see ayahuasca going, sort of broader picture in the next 5 years for Western people, and then also sort of where you fit into that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do to like add to another like data point or like detail, there's a decriminalization movement happening in the United States. I'm not sure about the global movement, but I can only imagine that it wouldn't be too far behind. And that was started in Denver when they decriminalized psilocybin cubensis mushrooms, but then that like started this steamroll really, where Oakland, California decriminalized all entheogens, including ayahuasca. Oregon went ahead and decriminalized all drugs and legalized psilocybin cubensis. Santa Cruz decriminalized. Ann Arbor, Michigan, 4 towns in Massachusetts. Washington, D.C. decriminalized ayahuasca. So if we're going to follow that trajectory, then it seems safe to say that there will be a national decriminalization of plants, which sounds pretty obvious, right? It's kind of like you'll be like, wait a second, there's plants that are illegal, but yes, there are. But we saw what happened, with the marijuana legalization movement, although I don't think it's federal yet, which is kind of crazy, but almost, definitely the majority of states have legalized it. So I think that we'll see something very similar to that with other entheogens, like with San Pedro and peyote and iboga and ayahuasca and plant medicines like that. We're seeing this crazy boom in psychedelic therapy. We're seeing more and more articles and videos and books and all types of media talking about ancestral traditions, but as well as psychedelics, like Michael Pollan, who is an author that really like brought a huge audience into the fold of ayahuasca, or rather psychedelics. I wish that he would take ayahuasca. But we're still like in a real big transitional mode, and so I think that there will be a lot more centers. There will be a lot more people offering ceremonies with ayahuasca specifically, but there will be a lot more psychedelic treatment centers as well. Psychedelic therapy will be adopted into like insurance plans, and it will become like a part of the lexicon or the pharmacy available for people. However, that's concerning to me as well. So my personal trajectory is like, I feel like it's my duty to maintain the respect that the ancestral traditions deserve by incorporating the key elements of their paradigm and understanding of healing into this newly blossoming branch of medicine. And so ceremony is kind of a key word there, but it goes far, far deeper than that. But the Western concept of medicine is substance based. That we don't think of medicine as a process. We think of it as a substance. So you never like have a ceremony when you take the medication you're prescribed in the Western medical model. You just go to the pharmacy and you buy it, you open the bottle and you take it. And then you like get in your car and turn on the radio and go home and watch TV or stop at McDonald's. Like there's no there's no context, there's no process. But psychedelics definitely come from a paradigm that looks at it differently. And the sensory gating is a clue to that, right? Because the sensory gating isn't the medicine. It's the potential for healing to take place, or if it is the medicine, that's what medicine does. But you are the healing. You are working with that ability, working with that state of being, that expansion of awareness. And what you do with it, like you can drink ayahuasca and sit on a couch and watch TV. You could, but the likelihood that you would experience the healing that most people talk about would be very low. But you could do it. And to me, that's kind of an evidence of how different it is. Because our understanding in the Western medical model is like, yeah, it doesn't make a difference. You take the medicine, you watch TV, or you take the medicine and you sit in meditation, or you take the medicine and you walk around in nature. It doesn't make a difference because it's a substance. And the substance acts on you in a chemical way in your biology. But we need to transform that. We owe it to ourselves in an effort to advance our medical understanding, to transform that paradigm so that you don't just go to the hospital and get chemotherapy if that's your prescription, so that you go to a chemotherapy ceremony and you activate your consciousness and you allow your spirit to play a role to enhance the effects of the medicine and the treatment that you're taking. And that's not some like new age bullshit. There's hard data on that, like very, very well articulated statistical data that shows that when you become an active participant in your own healing process, you achieve a better outcome. Why we're not focusing all of our attention on that process, I have no idea. how anyone could ever recognize the placebo effect and not want to make it their entire life's work to figure out how to make that happen more often. I don't understand. Like, well, we're just going to throw that out. Like, oh, that guy, he was healed, but it was just his mind. Get rid of him out of the study. We just want to look at the people who didn't activate their consciousness, because we want to know what happens if you take this medicine while you're asleep.
Well, the unprofitability of the placebo
well,
probably your clue there.
Well, I think that we're at a point too where we're hitting our own little rock bottom moment where we're like, what the fuck? Like, no offense, and I hope it's okay to swear on this, but like, the pharmaceutical company made how much money? Like, how much money did you make selling us this medicine that doesn't work? And I think that our disillusionment is pushing us to seek out the ancestral medicine traditions, to do exactly like what they didn't want us to do. And that is, I guess, how the plan like comes to fruition.
Living in Bali, there's a ceremony happening like 24/7 somewhere close to you, like in the village, for religion or starting a business or like this is parades and ceremonies all the time. I think they spend half of their monthly income on ceremony, and being immersed in that, it feels a little ridiculous at first. Like, come on, you guys, like turtle crossing the road ceremony, okay. But there's like denoting significance to something and setting aside like a specific, just an intent for anything, almost like before you go into a business meeting, you can have just a little personal ceremony, like what am I doing here? What is this for? What is this podcast for? It goes such a long way. I would love to see that sacredness, that ceremonial container brought into more aspects of our lives.
Well, I use ceremony just because it's a very easy thing for us to wrap our heads around, but there's so much complexity, even just in that word and its meaning. You did a good job, like of how the significance increases. It's like an intentional activation of significance or meaning. But like when you think of ceremony, even though we don't have hardly any ceremonies in our culture anymore, but the ones that we do, we at least know that you need to be respectful, and you need to have some level of reverence, and there's a mindset that comes with the word. Even when we just imagine ceremony, there is an attitude and a behavior that comes to mind for almost anyone. And that's like an example of it. But it goes so much deeper than that. And, and that interconnectivity, that reverence for nature is a really important part. It's an integral part. If we were to remember that we are nature, that it's not over there, that we're made of the same nature as the tree, and then I think that we would understand those things that we might have found silly about indigenous cultures at the time when we looked at them as primitive. Mm-hmm. But also we would feel that support. When you know that the trees have your back, when you know that like a mountain will take care of you. It might sound weird when we say it, but there is that knowing that is a reality. And that's what animals know. Animals know that. And we are animals. We've forgotten that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about an aspect. These entheogens are powerful tools. And I've gotten sort of warnings or admonitions from the shaman I apprentice under, of if you're going to use these powerful tools, you better have enough power to be able to work with them. And there's potentially irresponsible use of them by people who don't have personal power to be able to do that. And so what's your thoughts on, should only trained curanderos who can like see what's happening in the spirit realm and like help you out when you're in trouble, is that the only circumstance when it would be safe enough to like really go deep with these plant medicines?
Yeah, man, it's I wish that I had an easy answer for that. I would say yes, right? It was a yes or no a question, right? But no, I want to like kind of get into what has to be said about the nuance of that. There's so many levels. And, I think that we have a great example at our disposal, which is yoga. Yoga is this like fully globalized tradition now. You can't go to a town anywhere and not have a yoga class. There's like a yoga teacher everywhere. And I'm not knocking it, but it has fully been globalized. Now, there's such a huge spectrum, within that. Like everyone could be you could line up all the yoga teachers in the United States, and there's going to be a lot of difference between them, from one side of the spectrum to the other. And the same would be true of healers. And honestly, the same would be true of brain surgeons or mechanics or, anything. So it's not so easy to just say someone needs to be some level of training. We have these systems where people are required to have some level of training, and you still have really shitty doctors who got their degrees, and they've got like the frame thing on the wall.
What is that?
And
what is that joke? What do you call a doctor who graduated at the bottom of their class?
A doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So it's not so simple. It's not so simple to say, oh, you need this much training. And it's something that gets talked a lot about, especially for me, because I run a course. That course is only 8 weeks. And people will say to me, like, you can't become a curandero in 8 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. What do you think? I'm like stupid or something? Like, I'm not trying to say you're going to become a curandero in 8 weeks, but in 8 weeks, you can learn a lot, especially about the paradigm that you're working with, right understanding and right practice. And the same, to me could be said of almost any art form. You can't become a painter in 8 weeks. You can't become a musician in 8 weeks. You can't become a poet in 8 weeks. You can't become a singer in 8 weeks. But what you can do in 8 weeks, if you devoted yourself to painting or to playing the guitar or to singing, you could make significant improvement. And if you use the example of the guitar, you could learn how the fundamentals of understanding music. You could learn music theory, the core fundamentals of music theory, the principles. You could learn proper technique. You could learn how to properly touch the strings. And on the left hand and the right hand, you could learn that. And at the end of 8 weeks, you could have good technique or know what good technique is, and you could have a basic understanding of the principles of music theory. That is a great foundation from which to practice. But the reality is, no matter how hard you practice, doesn't mean that you're going to be a great guitarist. There's other stuff happening there. There are other qualities. If that were true, then like every 50-year-old should be better than any teenager, right? Like it's impossible for a teenager to have practiced as long as the 50-year-old. Like they're haven't even lived as long. Anyone playing a guitar 20 years should be better than a 17-year-old. That's totally bullshit. That's like not even, you would never even consider that to be true, because there's something special. There's qualities, and people are healers much more for those qualities. People are artists for much more for those qualities, those kind of unnameable qualities. But we could try to put a name on them with compassion or heart or connection, or I don't know exactly what the best name for those qualities are, but understanding it to be an art form, and that a healer is an artist, I think helps us to recognize that it's not just training, and it's not, there's a special quality. And so for that reason, someone who has trained for a short period of time might be a much better healer than someone who's trained for a long period of time. The same way that someone who's played the guitar for a short period of time might be a better guitarist than someone who's played for a long period of time, because there's just these qualities that you can't really you can't teach, and also you can't like make them happen or not. Now, does a person who's played guitar for 20 years have the ability to play songs that people would like? They should. They should be able to do that. It's not like they're not a guitarist. They're just maybe not at the same level of playing the guitar as that person that we would call gifted. And that's what the word don refers to. When you say a curandero's name, like Don Enrique Lopez, you say don because a don is a gift. And so, but not a gift like a birthday present. It's a gift like when a person is gifted. So you say don to someone as in recognition of their gift. And that's really the truth of what makes a curandero. Now, if that's what you're talking about, that's some of the nuance. But obviously, like if you're just saying, hey, everybody's a shaman because shamans all learn from the plants. So all you need is to get yourself some ayahuasca and drink it because we're all shamans. Like, yeah, that's bullshit, and like, I definitely am not on that page. But I think I take a big step backward. And I don't mean backward like in progress, but I mean a big step back to allow me to see the big picture. And I do that again, like using yoga. Is the fact that the yoga teacher down the street isn't at the same level as the person whose familial lineage is 1,000 years old from India? Yeah, they're not even comparable, but will I receive some benefit in my life taking that class with the person down the road? There's a good chance. So I think that's probably the big picture. If I go to a ceremony and that person doesn't have a high level of training, but I come away from the experience with some benefit, then I give it the thumbs up.
Okay, and so particularly like with again, what was the phrase? The gating,
sensory gating, reducing sensory gating.
Like, is the shaman needed, the curandero needed to like guide someone's gating back to its normal 3D perception? Is there like a quality of assistance that's needed that's just like in order to be able to maintain an energetic container for people to safely return? Is that an important consideration?
There's a difference between necessity. I would say most of the time, no, it's not necessary. At the same time, I would say that it's very unlikely that a person who is not being guided by someone with a lot of dietas, to be specific, or someone who has mastered their art form, would be able to go to the depths, to the same level of depths in their healing. So if you were to drink ayahuasca in a ceremony led by someone who hadn't done much training, didn't have any dietas or very strong dietas, or hadn't mastered his art form or her art form, then you could have a beneficial experience, but that beneficial experience might be something on the nature of like, I felt light and I feel lighter now. And, I feel like I feel good in my body, and I was able to like see some things that I work through. Whereas someone who is with a person who is well trained, or has that mastery of art form, maestro is another word for curandero, that refers to that mastery of their art form. Um, then they might say, "Oh my God, I was completely reborn. I released all of my childhood traumas. I see myself as the person I know that I am." Like the language that they would use to describe the experience could be far more profound, because they were able to access a depth of healing that would be inaccessible to someone who didn't have that mastery. So that's like the level of positive effect, but there does exist the potential for negative effect. I don't think that it's a high risk, but it's certainly a risk that someone could go down into a trauma, let's say, and then can't come back. So they essentially become re-traumatized, and then they are worse as a result of doing the ceremony. And that's because the person that was leading the ceremony did not have a mastery that was adept enough to know what to do in that situation. And that's a real possibility. Now, again, I would say that it's not that common, but there's one thing, and I've seen this happen, at least because I do integration counseling. So sometimes I'll do counseling for people that have had difficulties after. And if someone goes to Peru, let's say, or has a curandero from the Amazon visit their town, and they do ceremonies with a master, a maestro, and then they go to a place like just down the road a month later because they heard that this guy's doing ceremonies. But that is not a maestro. That's a person that got their hands on a bottle of ayahuasca and thinks that they know what they're doing. And because they went to those depths with a master, now they will be able to go to those depths again, except now they're in the presence of someone that doesn't know how to bring them out or guide them through. And that can be very dangerous. And I guess, like, if we were to try to turn this into a piece of advice, if you are a person who has drank with someone that you took to be a master of that art form, or that you had a very, very deep, profound experience, then be very, very careful or mindful if you are considering doing a ceremony with someone that you recognize does not have the same level of mastery.
Yeah, that's probably the most specific warning, I think, that I'm glad you put it that way. And the yoga analogy is fruitful as well. Of course, there's a spectrum. And why wouldn't you want to do a ceremony with a maestro? If you can have exponentially greater impact, just go straight to the most effective conditions to start with.
Well, I agree. I will say there are a lot of considerations. Like there's a community in New York. It's quite large, like thousands of people, and it's very convenient. If you live in New York City and you can just hop on a train and go away for the weekend, do a couple ceremonies, and get back on a train and be back in town ready to go to work again on Monday. That's very convenient. To fly down to the Amazon rainforest isn't exactly an option for a lot of people. And then to have the connections, to know that there is some like Colombian taita coming up to your town to do a ceremony. How do you know if that's going to happen? And, like, how do you get into those circles where you learn about that? And so I do think that things are changing. I know there are churches. Joe Tafur started the Church of the Condor and the Eagle in Arizona, and he is very well trained Westerner. Did a 5-year apprenticeship in the Shipibo tradition with his teacher Ricardo Amaringo, and you know, those people are now around. I see there's like a real shift. In fact, starting with people like Carlos Castaneda and Terence McKenna and maybe even like William Burroughs. There was like this early pioneers that introduced these concepts to us. Of course, before them, there were like the truest of the true pioneers, like Richard Evans Schultes and Richard Spruce. But then there was like the generation that came from the Castaneda generation or the McKenna generation. And, they like were able to go deeper, I feel, with it. And now we're seeing this kind of crossover that I think can be marked by dieta, by the concept of dieta, where, Terence McKenna never mentioned dieta because he never like it couldn't have come into his understanding of it. It was too deep, to get down deep enough to even know about it. And so now we're like seeing dieta be like something that people are starting to become aware of. And that's like a big part of the courses that we do are the dietas that are providing like that connection to the spirits themselves. But I guess there's just like this next generation coming, and that next generation will like take things to another level as well. And if that coincides with this decriminalization movement, then who knows what we'll start to see.
And dieta is the process of forming a relationship with the plant.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Also, really quick, do you consider yourself to be a curandero?
I do not. No. I thought I was going to be. There probably was a time that I have.
Okay.
I don't know. I spend a lot of time with some really special people. And if I were to call myself a curandero, it would kind of be like if you played basketball with Michael Jordan and then like, yeah, I'm a basketball player. Like it's not my idea of a curandero, I think is on a level that, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the dieta process and perhaps maybe your own experience of forming a relationship with either ayahuasca or another plant?
Yeah, man, the dieta is a complex topic to say the least. Thankfully, we have relationship as the key word to kind of anchor our attempt to understand it. But yes, it is essentially, in a way, like a marriage, although with a time contract in addition to like a behavioral contract. So like we currently have marriage as a contracted arrangement, but it's the contract is like behavioral stipulations, but the time is forever, which maybe could be revised in the future. But that's how it. But at least there is, you sign that you sign the document, and a witness comes and signs it. Like it's a contract, and if you break that contract, you go to court, and like they figure out like how to settle it. It's quite literally like a relationship contract. And I think that's a good way of understanding it. This is more like a spiritual contract, but there is a behavioral component to it. The plants do want a specific type of behavior, and you agree to a particular type of behavior. And there's similar elements to that, but you're kind of like committing to this relationship, but it's also within a particular time period. So you might say, okay, I'm going to do this for 1 month or 8 weeks or 1 year or 10 days or something like that, and then it really comes down to what we know relationships to be, which is not that you follow the contract, like if you ask someone, so how is it going? Like you've been married for a year, how's it going? They're not going to refer to the contract. They're not going to be like, hey, we're both following the contractual obligations. So good going, like no one, you don't measure your relationship that way. unless you violate those obligations, in which case, if it goes south, then you bring those up, when you say, oh, I'm out of there, man, cheated on me, but the truth of a relationship is that it's much more about the love that you share with each other. And it's much more about how much you care, and what you do to express that is a part of like why those contractual obligations are followed. But that's not what defines the relationship. What defines the relationship is really the level of care that you have for it, how invested you are. And that's the depth of the relationship that you end up forming. And when a curandero opens a ceremony, like I said, they then communicate with those spirits, and based on the depth of their relationships, those spirits come to their aid the same way that we would have that. If you want to stay with the marriage, like if you call up your spouse and you need a big favor, then that's the measurement of the depth of your relationship. If you're like, I need a really big favor, and they're like, honey, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do that. Like, oh, okay, I guess that's where we're at. And if they say, whatever you need, I'm on it. I'll cancel everything on my schedule to make sure that I can do whatever I can for you. Then that's what that means, and we always want to strive for that, but it requires our level of commitment too. And that's what a curandero really is a person who has developed such deep relationships that they're willing to do whatever it takes for those relationships with their plant spirits, and their plant spirits likewise are willing to do whatever they can to the benefit of the curandero. And through that collaborative effort, they're able to achieve far greater work in the healing of the participants, because a patient typically doesn't have the ability to connect to that plant spirit on their own, because they lack the experience, because they lack the perspective, because they lack the understanding. But the curandero does. And so the curandero becomes this like mediary to introduce the patient to the plant spirit that they know, and to introduce the plant spirit to the patient, and to help guide their interaction. And so in that sense, the curandero is this really important part of this process, but that the healing itself takes place as a result of the interactions that a patient has individually with the spirits.
And so in a marriage, it's pretty obvious, like things you could do to deepen the relationship in terms of communication or someone's love language, figuring that out and giving them the right type of love. Interspecies, plant, human, how does a human express their commitment to a relationship with a plant?
Well, there's some real advantages to the plant dietas, because
they don't talk back.
Yes, they do. But you can't lie. That's the advantage. They can't lie to you, and you can't lie to them. And so it's like 100% transparency. And we can lie to our partner. We can hide things. We can play games. We can keep things from them that we don't want them to know. And you cannot do that when you're in a plant dieta. And I say that's a benefit, because it just kind of clears all that shit out. Like, no point in even trying to play a game or project something. And that would be a great idea for marriages too. Like, wouldn't that be nice if we just didn't play any games? But you just can't. So it really like brings things down to the core, which is just who you are. You just are going to be who you are, and you're just going to be where you are, and you're going to do the best that you can. So if you wake up and you're while doing your dieta, if you wake up in the morning and your first thought is, what can I do today for the plant that I'm dieting? Or can I think of the plant that I'm dieting to see if I can connect? Can I communicate? Can I feel something with this plant that I'm dieting? Can I give it some attention? Can I sing a song for it? Can I hopefully learn a song from it? Can I, anything about it? And likewise, that would be a great thing if you were married, if you woke up and had that thought. But if you wake up and are like, oh, great, another boiled potato for breakfast, then that's who you are. I mean, that's where you're at. And, there's no, you're not then going to like pretend that you're okay with it and try to put on some fake projection smile and say, oh, but I love you, plant. Like you can't hide it. And so you just do the best that you can. And, there's a statement that I think is kind of hitting it where it's a teaching within the Shipibo lineage that I work with, where if you're dreaming and a person comes up in your dream and wants to have sex with you, you should tell them that you're dieting and that you can't. And, to me, like the meaning is that it just should be that deep in you, that even when you're in a dream, you know that you're dieting and your diet is that important to you, that even the self, your dream self, knows you're dieting and will act accordingly.
Yeah. That's profound. I spend a lot of time preparing for and recording my dreams and studying them. And so that's really interesting. You brought that up. Because I hadn't considered bringing dedication to something into a dream like that. This is fantastic. Yeah, I love your you work these funny little bits into your analogies. It's very entertaining.
Thank you.
We're getting towards the end of our time here, and if there's something I haven't asked you about yet, or something that you think is important to share, or whatever you like, I'll just give you the floor to.
All right, I appreciate that. Maybe I can talk just a little bit on a topic that seems to be coming up in awareness also. Now that we talked about dieta, another thing that's come up maybe more recently is integration. In fact, it seems like every month there's some integration coaching course now. I've actually done a little research out of curiosity and scheduled some integration circles to see what a person who has completed a course might offer. And I guess it's very gray and it's very fuzzy, what that looks like. And so I have some ideas, and my ideas might be fuzzy too, but maybe I could share them, because I do think that there's a way to understand the mechanics of integration. So obviously the idea of integration is if you have a profound healing experience but then you go home, how do you take that healing experience and integrate it into your life so that the healing that you experience doesn't fade away and actually is maintained or expanded. And so to me, I look at that and I break down the way that our systems work, our minds work, in 3 stages. So you have the response to your experience, the interpretation of your experience, and the memory of your interpretation. And the memory of your interpretation becomes the greatest influence to determine how you respond to the next experience that stimulates that is similar enough to stimulate a search for memories. So, an easy example would be that if you are walking home from school as a small child and a dog runs out of a house barking at you, and you become very scared by the dog, then you could interpret that experience that the dog is attacking you, and then you remember that a dog attacked you. And you interpret it because you got scared that it was attacking you. The dog might have been coming out being like, hey, I'm so happy to see you. I wish you could play with me right now. But you were scared because it was running and barking. And that led you to think it was attacking you. And then that led you to feel like you had been attacked by a dog. Now, the next time you see a dog running and barking, you're very likely to become scared again, because you will reference that you had been attacked by a dog in your memory. And then that will stimulate you to respond in a similar fashion. And thus that will then influence you to interpret the experience similarly and then remember it similarly again. And then you start to create a program. And there's this program that is response, interpretation, remember. And the memory references it influences the response influences the interpretation, and so forth. And in a healing experience, oftentimes, because of that reduction of sensory gating or that expansion of awareness, we are able to reinterpret a memory. So we can go into our past and visit the memories that we have, but we're able to reinterpret them, because we have access to more information, because we have more sensory data to deal with, to process. And so we can then say, I got that wrong. I see now that a more accurate interpretation is this. And that more accurate interpretation now transforms your memory. Now your memory is different. Now the experience is different, at least your memory of it. And that can then influence the way you respond to a future experience differently. And that can break you from a detrimental program.
Yeah.
The challenge is that that's great. Like the night of the ceremony, you're like, I did it, and the next day, maybe you're like, I'm never going to think that way again. Then you go home into the environment that has been a part of all of that program for so long, and you've got 1,000 memories still that are the wrong interpretation, and you've got one that's your new positive interpretation. And so we have this natural idea, well, if I've got 1,000 memories of this happening this way, and I only have one memory of it happening this way, chances are it happened the other way, the 1,000 memory way. And so you're up against, the cards are stacked against you. So you need to stack the deck in your new memory. So to me, a great way to do that is to record the memory, and then to replay and replay and replay the recording to make new memories each time. So what do I mean by that? Like, first, write down what the reinterpretation is. Now you'll remember that you wrote it down. That is another memory. Now read what you wrote down. Now reading it is another memory. You can read it 1,000 times too. That's one way to get there. But now add to it. Now make it a project. If it's still the dog barking and you realize that it was coming to play, write the whole story. Write it into some epic novel, amplify it, like make it big, draw pictures too. Paint the colors that conjure the feeling that you have when you recognize that a dog is looking to play, as opposed to what it felt like when you thought it was there to attack. Use everything that you have, nonverbal and verbal, to continuously create more and more memories. If you make a memory every day, or 5 memories a day, let's say you're like, read that story and then go to the pet store and look at dogs, or you just like intentionally create more and more memories, and each time you're validating that truth over and over again, until you will get to that point where you just don't refer to the inaccurate memories anymore to determine how to influence your responses in the future. And that to me is like a mechanical way to use intentional integration methods.
Yeah, that's a great example, and I think when people say like doing the work, uh, drawing a picture and stacking the deck in favor of one memory interpretation, or like this is part of doing the work. So I think uh, that's super clear. And
Well, for
yeah,
some people, it happens naturally. For some people, you can't help it. Like for me, but that's what I'm basing this on, is my own experiences. But like, I had to tell every single person I met. It was like,
yeah,
so it was so important to me. It was so like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I, of course, wrote it down. I wrote it into a whole book. Like it was, I didn't need to like intentionally do it. I just couldn't not do it. And I think that that's what I've seen over and over again. Like when you talk to someone and they are still telling you about that time when they drank ayahuasca 10 years ago, and they still talk about it with this like passion and these details, then that, yeah, that they're good. But other people need help with that. It's not just so like easy for them to just keep it fresh in their mind every day. But there are tools, and that's what I'm outlining. It's not for the people that don't need any help. It's
yeah.
for that person that comes back and they already feel like they're slipping back. They felt like they had such a great experience, and now they find themselves like falling back into their programs. Well, you can get intentional with it. There are techniques, and one of the techniques is that stacking of the deck of memories, or intentional memory reproduction.
And I suppose there's always, people may expect, wow, I won't need any of these tools because it's such a profound experience. And then 6 weeks later, and you're like, oh, I'm feeling depressed again, or I'm fighting again, or whatever it might be. Like when did I lose the gains that I had made? And then tools could be reached for.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a pretty obvious aspect of healing that is worth mentioning, and that is if you've ever had a fish as a pet and your fish has gotten sick, then you know that you need to clean the tank, right? Like that's it. Like the fish didn't just magically become sick. The tank made the fish sick.
Yeah.
And so you take the fish out of the tank, you put it in clean water, you maybe add a couple drops of medicine to it or something. But while it's in that clean water, you clean out the tank. You clean it all out real good. You set up, make sure the filter and everything's like good to go again. You give it the best environment, put the fish back in. Yeah, fish gets healed. Actually, I just yesterday watched this video on YouTube that was like someone rescued a fish from a pet store. I don't even know that you do that. How do you do that? But it was like this black goldfish. It was like super sick. It couldn't even swim. It was like sitting on the bottom. And he just kept replacing the water, like with fresh water. And it like got its health back up, and all the black disappeared, and it turned back into like a goldfish, like beautiful. And it was just because its environment had been improved. Mm. And that is a really key, important detail, because, you can go to an ayahuasca retreat and, remove yourself from your environment and put a couple drops of medicine in the clean water. And, but if you put the fish back in the same bowl, it's going to have the same thing happen. And so it would be great if somebody could clean our fishbowl while we were away at our retreat, but that doesn't happen. The work is on you. And that's a big part of the work too, is removing the detrimental influences of your environment so that they don't continue to have that detrimental influence on your life.
New type of business, fish while you're at retreat, we'll just come in like,
dude, that would be great.
Place your spouse, redo your house, and you come back and you're like, oh my gosh, my life is amazing.
Yeah, here's a list of your new friends.
Uh, um, fantastic. So Carlos, where would you like to point people to learn more about you or find you online?
Sure. The ayahuascafoundation.org is our website. You can find everything there. We all are on social media, but I don't really do that much on social media anymore. But yeah, just go into our website. You can find as much information as possible. And then the contact us form sends an email straight to me. So if you want to contact me, you can contact me through that.
Beautiful. I've enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Definitely, man. It was great talking to you.